2. Introduction. Illusions have been a fascinating topic for most people. A lot of scientific studies have taken place on perception, and it dates back to the very beginning of the 19th century. It was during this phase that scientists got engrossed in understanding perception. Therefore, since then there has been enduring interest, and illusions have been used as tools in the study of perception. A lot of theories have been formulated ever since for explaining what illusions are. Illusions are generally misleading perceptions of any visual image. A person who sees something contradicting to what others see is termed to have illusion. This consists of seeing shapes, lengths, and directions in a wrong way. Let us now try and understand illusions with its types and also discuss about the role of subliminal perception in this module. 3. Illusions. An illusion refers to unique perceptual experiences in which information is received from a real, external stimuli. This information further leads to an incorrect perception or a false impression, leading to stimulation from the objects or events. It is a constant error in visual perception. Therefore, it is a wrong or false perception. When an illusion is witnessed, our perception does not correspond to what is actually out there that exists in the real world. Illusions generally fool an individual. A child may perceive a tree branch at night to be his monster, which may be said to be an illusion. It also becomes important to clearly distinguish between illusions and hallucinations, as they tend to create a lot of confusion. An illusion is an experience that seems to originate with an external source of stimulation. Hallucination, on the other hand, is perception of objects not present at all. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. The vision of an oasis at a distance in a desert is a hallucination. Some people see ghosts in the dark. Difference between illusion and hallucination. Illusion. 1. Illusion is a kind of a false or wrong perception. 2. Illusions consist of an external stimulus. 3. Illusion is almost common and is generally universal. 4. Normal persons can also suffer from illusions. 5. Similar situation produce the same type of illusion in most people. Hallucination. 1. Hallucination is generally referred to as false perception. 2. Hallucinations are caused by internal stimulations, no external stimulus is present. 3. Hallucination is related to one's personal experiences. 4. Hallucinations are limited to mentally ill persons. 5. Similar situations may not arouse hallucination in all. Individual differences play a role with regard to hallucination. It is also seen that same individual may experience different hallucinations on different occasions also. Causes of illusion. Let us now try and understand the different causes of illusions. They are as follows. 1. Similarity. It indicates that two objects that appear to be equal in size and shape may be subject to higher degree of illusion. For instance, a long leaf is a lizard on the floor. 2. Expectancy. It refers to the phenomena that when we are expecting something, then everything seems to be false, similar to the expectant object. For example, while waiting for an empty auto rickshaw, all autos at a distance appear to be empty. Another example would be that, while. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Searching for your lost jewelry, all other glittering objects will be mistaken for the one which you are searching. 3. Subjective factor. Sometimes our habits and familiarity towards objects can cause illusion. For example, cross two fingers of your hand, try and feel a marble with the crossed fingers, you may see to feel one marble is separated into two. 4. Types of illusion. As discussed earlier, also illusion is a distortion of a sensory perception. Illusions are subjective in nature, as individual differences may persist which leads them to experience illusion differently. Human senses can be deceived by illusions, but visual illusions are the most well known among them. There are several different kinds of illusions. Here are some really interesting types of illusion. 4.1 Ponzo illusion. The first type of illusion is the Ponzo illusion. This type of illusion describes the closeness of the objects with the increase in distance. As the objects fade from the starting distance, they tend to merge at the horizon and appear more closer. This can be well illustrated in railway track. As we move our eyes on the railway track, the two parallel tracks seem to converge at end and also appear closer from the starting point. At times the length of one track where person is standing may seem to exceed than the other, but in reality both the tracks are equal in length and equidistant also. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 4.2 Zollner's illusion. The second type of illusion is the Zollner's illusion. It states the influence of figure-ground relationship in interpretation of the image by the brain. The abstract background of the figure tends to create uneasiness if I-consent is increased. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 4.3 Muller-Lyer illusion. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 4.3 Muller-Lyer illusion. It was first discovered in 1889 by F. C. Muller-Lyer. The perceptual error has then been gaining prominence and has been well investigated by various theorists. In the image above, you could see lines parallel to each other, but which line appears the longest? The response for majority of the people is the line with outwards arrow is longer than the line with inward arrow. But in reality, both the lines are equal. It is just the type of arrow that creates the illusion, and hence, arrow with outward face is perceived longer than the inward face. An explanation to the phenomena was provided by R. H. Day. He proposed that error occur due to the difference between the length of the line and the length of the figure. The length of the entire figure increases as a result of outward fins in comparison to entire length of the figure with inward fins, having the length of the line is same. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 4.4 Moon illusion. This type of illusion is an example of optical illusion and is also referred at times as the moon effect. In this type of illusion, the angular size of the moon is viewed at times to be twice more when near the horizon than high in the sky. Moon at a height appears to be small, whereas moon somewhere down appears to be a big huge object in the visual field. Few common theories for explaining such illusions are discussed here. Apparent distance theory. This theory aims to explain the phenomena and light of the depth cues. When we see the moon near the horizon, we view it in existence of various depth cues such as trace, mountains and other scenic components. However, when we view the moon high in sky, there is a complete absence of such depth cues and thus the moon is perceived smaller in the clear sky. Angular size contrast theory. This theory focuses on the relative figure-ground relationship. It proposes that when moon is near the horizon, it is surrounded by various scenic objects which appear to be smaller. So the moon in this image tends to highlight itself amongst small objects and thus view large. In case of moon in high sky, it appears to be small as a figure in large background of the sky. There has been lack of conformity over the idea plausible explanation of moon illusion. Other factors that contribute to the explanation are color, atmospheric perspective and visual factors. According to the color perspective, because the moon at the horizon emerges red in color, therefore it seems to be bigger. In case of atmospheric perspective, the moon appears to be big as a result of dust and smoke in the atmosphere. The visual factors explain the phenomena in light of Ponzo illusion. As the distance increases, the object seems to be smaller. The true fact is that no one factor but many factors may contribute to the phenomena. 5. Subliminal perception. The word, subliminal, explains the phenomenon of responding to stimuli below the threshold of awareness. Johann Herbart, 1776-1841. It suggests that it occurs for all the sense modalities and involves sensation and reciprocation to use to a frail action or experience. The phenomena is Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Gaining importance as people's actions are believed to be strongly influenced by such unaware perceptions. Since such perceptions form a part of path of consciousness and determine thought, behavior, and action, hence its understanding is completely warranted. To elucidate the phenomena, in a study, subjects were presented with fade visual letters, digits, etc., and auditory whispered letters, stimuli to which subjects were not sure of perceiving them or not. Following, when the subjects were asked to recall the stimuli, responses confirmed the perception of the stimulus without conscious awareness of the individual to it. The results confirmed the perception of the stimuli without its conscious acknowledgement and its potential role in influencing decisions. 5.1. Application of subliminal perception. Patients with neurological damage. In case of patients with neurological deficits, this phenomena is quite commonly observed. The patients tend to assert that they have not seen a particular stimuli, but conversely, they tend to strongly react to the same stimuli. Again, the perception of the stimuli happens without conscious awareness of it. In case of blind sight patients, limited visual field as a result of lesion to visual cortex results in unacknowledged perception of stimuli. For example, absence of quadrant in the visual field as a result of damage may be expected to loss of information of the same. But surprisingly, the patients are able to accurately guess the size and shape of the absent quadrant. In case of people who suffer with face agnosia, they are not able to retain the structure of the face to whom they may be talking to. However, when asked to identify the name with face, they may do it accurately. Such people are not able to recall the features of the face in awareness but tend to respond correctly to the information associated with it. Advertising. The phenomena is well used in the field of advertising where certain messages who are not given conscious attention still tend to impact the decisions of the people. For example, when we walk over the roads, there can be various hoardings that talk about losing weight or women helpline. We may not consciously attend to and register the information, but when we are asked about them we may be able to respond by stating the location or the area where we saw the hoarding. This has also been well used as a marketing strategy to enhance unaware perception and its role in determining buyers' behavior. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 6. Summary. An illusion refers to unique perceptual experiences in which information are received from the real, external stimuli. There are different causes of illusions, namely, similarity, expectancy, and subjective factors. Illusions are categorized into different types that are Ponzo illusion, Zollner's illusion, Muller-Lyer illusion, and moon illusion. The first type of illusion is the Ponzo illusion, stating the appearance of the objects is smaller when they move farther from the standing point. The second type of illusion is the Zollner's illusion, illustrating the figure-ground relationship influencing the perception. Muller-Lyer illusion happens as result of difference in the total length of the figure attributed the type of arrow in comparison to the length of line, which is same for both. A moon illusion is an optical illusion in which the moon appears larger near the horizon than it is while higher up in the sky. The word, subliminal, explains the phenomenon of responding to stimuli below the threshold of awareness. It suggests that it occurs for all the sense modalities and used to describe situations that consist of weak stimuli. Application of subliminal perceptions is seen in the area of advertising and in the patients who have neurological damage. Psychology. As children, we have all played with Lego blocks. At times we constructed the structures given on the cover of the block set, or we just joined small blocks to form a structure on our own. What we don't realize is how we apply simple principles of perceptual processing into our daily lives. Yet this concept of how information is processed to form our perception has always been a central idea in the realm of psychology. Similarly, psychologists have always marveled about how humans organize stimuli, how humans see the world in 3 dimensions, perceive depth and motion. Gestalt psychologists were the pioneers to study the concept of organization in perception. In this discussion, we will touch upon how stimuli are processed to create our perception, how perceptual organization is done, and how depth and motion are perceived. 3. Perceptual processing. In simple terms, perception can be defined as making sense of what our sensory organs tell us. It is an active process of organizing stimulus input and giving it a meaning. Mather, 2006, May, 2007. So, perceptual processing can be defined as the process of processing information into a meaningful whole. There are a few important requirements for perceptual processing that includes raw material or stimulus, means of acquiring raw material, means of organizing raw material into a structure and assumption about how the world is put together. A person processes information according to his or her needs and demands. For instance, a student might break the chapter into units and study, whereas another student might make notes to form the content of the chapter and study. Thus, to create our perception, our brain carries two types of processing functions, namely, bottom-up and top-down processing. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 3.1, Bottom-up processing. Bottom-up processing is a system in which people take in individual elements of a stimulus and then combine them into a unified perception. In simple terms, bottom-up processing occurs when we register objects and elements, say words, and combines them to form a whole, say, sentences. Another example would be the one stated above of a student making notes to learn the chapter. Similarly, as you read, your visual system also operates in bottom-up fashion. Your visual system detects and analyzes the elements of each letter and then combines them into our visual perception of letters and words. 3.2. Top-down processing. Top-down processing is the use of pre-existing knowledge to organize individual features into a unified whole. Simply, top-down processing occurs when we break down a unified whole into pieces. Here, sensory information is interpreted in light of existing knowledge, concepts, ideas, and expectations. This processing involves much more higher-order knowledge and accounts for many psychological influences on perception, such as roles played by our motives, expectations, previous experiences, and cultural learning. For instance, how are children taught which animal is a dog? A dog is first shown to the child and then the child registers that it has 4 legs, 1 tail, 1 nose, etc. Hence, a bigger concept dog is broken down into smaller elements. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. To understand the concept of top-down and bottom-up processing completely, we will take examples of how we solved jigsaw puzzles as children. At times we referred the main picture and subsequently fit in different pieces of the puzzles top-down, or we might have made the entire picture by joining small puzzle bits bottom-up processing. The given flowchart shows how top-down and bottom-up processing occurs. 7. Perception of form. Humans have a preference for picking out figures from their background. This most basic process in perception of form is recognizing a figure on a background occurs even as early as birth. For example, we notice clocks hanging on the walls, a teacher standing in front of a blackboard, or our teacher's lecture standing out of the sound of the fan. Here, the clock, the teacher, and the teacher's notes are perceived as the figure in the wall, the blackboard, and the sound of the fan as the background. Thus, this ability to distinguish an object from its background is fundamental to all form perception. Gestalt psychologists define figure-background relationship as the tendency to perceive objects or figures as existing on some background. To better understand concept of figure-background relationship, please refer to the diagrams given below. Example. Rubens vase. One might perceive the given diagram as a goblet vase, whereas another person might perceive it as 2 faces approaching each other. In both the cases, the responses or perception changes according to what a person perceives as figure and what is background. Example. Necker's cubies. There is no depth Q. The viewer is not sure which plane or edge is in front. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 4.1. Figure background. Figure can be defined as the part of stimuli that is into focus of the perceiver, i.e. the central figure. It has definite shape in reference to its surroundings. Figure is also an object that has location in space. Background is the total surrounding of the figure. The characteristic of background is that it is always in continuity, or in simple terms we can say that it is not defined by finite boundaries or lines. Difference between figure and background. Figure background. In focus of the perceiver is not in focus of perceiver. Has definite shape does not have definite shape. Is defined by finite boundaries is not defined by finite boundaries. Has a location in space. Is always in continuity. 4.2. Contours. What makes us able to separate forms from the general background? The answer to this is contours. Contours give shape to the objects in our visual world as they mark one object separate from another or its respective background. Contours are formed when there is marked difference in brightness or color of the background. For example, birds are seen contrast to its white sky. This is due to our ability to notice the marked difference in the color of the object bird and its background sky. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. When contours are disrupted visually, we find it difficult to distinguish objects from its background. This occurs in the case of camouflage. But it must be remembered that though contours give shape to forms, it does not mean that they themselves are shapes. It has been seen that despite the energy level changes involved in the formation of contours, contours can also be seen even in the absence of any energy difference. These are so-called subjective contours. An example is given below. In this figure, we see the contours of an inverted triangle even when there is no energy difference except at the corners. 5. Perception of depth, space and movement. What guides our visualization of depth? What accords for our perception of space and what causes our perception of movement? This section focuses on answering all these questions. 5.1 Depth perception. The concept of perception and visualization of an object as far or near has also marveled psychologists. Search for an answer has led psychologists to develop the concept of depth perception. Depth perception can be defined as the ability to see the world in 3 dimensions. It is this ability that tells us how far or near an object is from us. This ability seems to be present in infants at a very young age and is evident from the visual cliff experiment done by Eleanor Gibson in 1950s on 6 to 14 months old infants. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. There are 2 types of cues for perceiving depth in the world, namely monocular cues and binocular cues. 7.1. Monocular cues. You must have noticed painters closing one eye and examining the scene they tend to paint. They are using monocular cue to give an illusion of depth to their 2-dimensional paintings or drawings. Hence, as the term suggests, monocular cues are cues that require only one eye. Since they are used by painters or artists to provide an illusion of depth to their pictures, these are also called pictorial cues. Example of pictorial cues: we perceive the painting to be of a corridor. The various types of cues. 1. Relative size. When an object of a certain size appears to be small, we perceive it as being far away. This is based on the principle of size constancy. For example, in the given picture, the image of the biker that is forming a larger image on the retina is perceived to being more loose than the ones forming smaller image. 2. Linear perspective. It is the tendency of parallel lines to appear to converge with each other as they recede into distance. A typical example is the railroad track. Similarly, as we look at the edges of a highway or escalator, they may appear to angle towards each other with increased distance. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Interposition. If one object seems to be blocking another object, we assume that the blocked object is behind the first one and therefore is farther away. This ability is known as interposition or overlap. Example: we perceive the circle to be farther away as the rectangle overlaps the circle. Likewise, we know that our professor is closer to us than the blackboard because she overlaps the blackboard. 3. Aerial perspective. This seems to work on the principle that farther away an object, the more hazy it will appear. This is due to the fact that as distance increases, tiny particles of dust, dirt and other pollutants come between the object and perceiver's eyes, causing a blurred vision. Example: distant mountains appear hazier than the near ones. 4. Texture gradient. It is the tendency for textured surface to become finer as distance from the viewer increases. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Example: the texture becomes finer as the distance increases from the viewer. 5. Accommodation. Accommodation is the ability of the brain to use information about the changing thickness of the lens when one looks at an object that is placed close or far away. 6. Motion parallax. It occurs when we move our head, stoop or turn, walk or move through our environment. Parallax is a very powerful and accurate distance cue. It is credited for being effective across an enormous range of distances. Here, the objects that are closer appear to pass by more quickly than objects that are farther away. A classic example would be of you traveling in your car and the nearby trees pass more quickly than the trees that are farther away. In the given picture, to a person riding the Jeep, the vehicle moves rapidly, and the bushes behind appears to move more slowly. Since the camera followed the motion of the vehicle, it appeared to be stationary while the bushes appear to move fast. Since the camera followed the motion of the vehicle, appear to move fast. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 7. Shadows. The effect of shadows provides a 3-dimensional impact on any image as it makes an object stand out of its background. As is evident from the painting, the shadows provide a 3-dimensional perception. 8. Height and horizontal plane. To understand this cue, we will discuss the given painting. In this painting, the farther objects like the trees are highest. We know the boats are nearer to us as they are placed lower than the trees. This is how this cue comes into play. 5.1. B. Binocular cues. As the term suggests, binocular cues are those that require both eyes to perceive depth. There are 2 major binocular cues, which are convergence and binocular disparity. 1. Convergence. It is a muscular cue which refers to the rotation of the 2 eyes in their sockets to focus on a single object. If the object is close, the convergence is pretty great, almost equal to crossing of the eyes, and if the object is far, the convergence is less. To better understand this concept, let's perform small activity. Hold your finger in front of your nose and focus on it. Now move it away slowly and then bring it back. You can actually feel your eyes converging in reality. 2. Binocular disparity. Binocular disparity is the difference in the images between the 2 eyes, which is greater for objects that are close and smaller for distant object. This happens because our eyes are a few inches apart, so we don't see the exact same image of an object by both the eyes. It is the brain that interprets the distance of the object. If the image is formed by both the eyes is very different, then the object is placed close by, but if the object shows negligible difference when you close one eye, then the object is far away. To understand this principle, focus on an object that is close to you by closing one eye and then closing the other while opening the other eye. Notice the large difference in the Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Images formed by both the eyes. Now repeat this with an object that is far from you and notice that there is less difference, or no, jumping, of object's image for both the eyes. 7.2. Perception of motion. Since young age, we have always wondered what makes us understand movement or motion of objects. What makes us perceive motion in the first place? Psychologists have answered our queries through the concepts discussed ahead. The perception of movement is a complex process, sometimes requiring the brain to integrate information from several different senses. Adaptive behavior in the visual world requires that we perceive movement accurately. For instance, as a cricket player, it becomes necessary for one to perfectly judge the movement of an approaching ball if he intends to play rather than being on the bench or in the hospital. Apparent and real motion. Perception helps one decide about the movement characteristics of a stimulus. Movement itself is divided into two types on the basis provided by perception itself, namely apparent and real motion. Real motion. The perception of actual physical movement of objects in the world is called real perception, i.e., when an object moves in reality, it is called real motion. This motion involves the active processing of the sensory input, for instance, the movement of an approaching football to a player in a soccer match. We perceive real motion because the object's perceived velocity is dependent on the rate at which an object moves relative to its background. Also, the brain comparator, a system which compares information about muscle movement with the information of retinal movement of retinal image, explains the real motion to the perceiver. B. Apparent motion. It is defined as the movement perceived in the absence of physical movement of an image across the retina. In other words, with the eye, head and body steady and with no physical movement of an object, motion is still perceived. One must know that the illusion of smooth motion can be produced if we arrange sequential appearance of two or more stimulus. This apparent motion is known as stroboscopic movement and was demonstrated by Max Wertheimer in 1912 in his studies. Stroboscopic movement can be defined as the illusionary movement due to the flashing of lights and switching them off in sequences when placed together as one observes in the cat eyes at the Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Edges of the highway. This concept is applied in movies and on television. A movie projector simply throws a succession of pictures of a moving scene onto a screen, which creates the illusion of movement. Each frame is slightly different from the preceding one, and these frames are presented at the speed of 24 pictures per second in movie and 30 pictures per second in TV. Thus, we perceive continuous, smooth motion. A similar effect is seen in theaters' marquee signs when they are flashed on and off in succession. The autokinetic effect is also an example of apparent motion. If a person stares at a small stationary spot of light in a completely dark room, the spot will eventually appear to move. The autokinetic effect is also an example of apparent motion. If a person stares at a small stationary spot of light in a completely dark room, the spot will eventually appear to move. This effect is well demonstrated in an experiment that suggests that apparent motion can be large and is influenced by suggestion of or conformity. Another concept of induced movement occurs if a stationary spot of light or object is perceived as moving when its background or frame changes. This concept was applied a lot in old Indian cinema when the background of the hero's car would be moving and an effective induced movement of the hero's vehicle is also perceived. Similarly, when we were children, we perceived the moon to be racing through the clouds. This occurs as there is movement of the frame of clouds, there is induced movement of the stationary moon as well. 8. Summary. 1. Perceptual processing can be defined as the method of processing information into a meaningful whole. There are two types of perceptual processing, namely bottom-up and top-down processing. 2. Bottom-up processing is a system in which people take in individual elements of a stimulus and then combine them into a unified perception. 3. Top-down processing is the use of pre-existing knowledge to organize individual features into a unified whole. 4. Humans have a tendency to pick out figure from its general background. Figure is the part of the stimuli that is in focus, whereas the background is the surrounding of the figure. 5. Contours give shape to the objects in our visual world as they mark one object separate from another or its respective background and are formed when there is marked difference in brightness or color of the background. 6. Depth perception can be defined as the ability to see the world in 3 dimensions. It is this ability that tells us how far or near an object is from us. There are two types of cues for perceiving depth, which are monocular cues and binocular cues. 7. Monocular cues are the cues that require only one eye to perceive depth. It includes relative size, linear perspective, interposition overlap, aerial perspective, texture gradient, accommodation, motion parallax, shadows and height in horizontal plane. 8. Binocular cues are the cues that require both the eyes to 8. Binocular cues are the cues that require both the eyes to perceive depth, and the two major binocular cues are convergence and binocular disparity. 9. Perception of movement has important adaptive functions. Perception of movement causes two types of movement, real motion and apparent motion. Real motion is the actual physical movement of an object. 10. Apparent movement is perceived movement in the absence of actual physical movement of an object. It includes stroboscopic movement, autokinetic effect and induced. Psychology paper number 1. Our senses make us aware of all that is around us, and our perception makes us interpret the information of our surrounding. But there are so many things around us, some of which is not of any relevance to us. So, what makes us aware of which input needs to be focused upon and which needs to not be channelized by our senses? Which adaptive process is involved in overcoming this daily life challenge? What are the determinants of this process? Can there be any faults or failures in this process? What does these failures lead to? This section focuses on answering all these queries along with introducing you to the concept of neurocognition and attention. 3. Definition. Our senses are bombarded by countless stimuli at every second of time, yet we only perceive a select few of them clearly. For instance, while talking to your classmate, you might not be aware of the cracking sound the fan above your head is making or the scribbling of pen another classmate is doing. Though we get constant input into your senses, especially your ears, we attend or focus only on a certain stimuli like talking. Paper number 1, Cognitive Science. To your classmate, the term given to this perceptual process of selecting only a few or certain stimuli or input for inclusion in our conscious awareness is known as attention. John R. Anderson defined attention as the cognitive process of selectively concentrating on one aspect of the environment while ignoring other things. Attention is the process through which we select stimuli which we want to register into our awareness. It involves selecting certain stimuli for processing and to canceling out of stimuli that we don't intend to register in our awareness. This adaptive process acts as a facilitator for carrying out the various activities of our life. This could be as simple as talking to a friend to planning a rescue mission for a disaster-struck region. Attention is involved in every sphere of our life and is active 24/7. Carver and Schuler said that attention can be thought of as the bridge over which some parts of the external world, the aspects selectively focused on, are brought into the subjective world of our consciousness so that we may regulate our own behavior. Attention is a clear awareness of sensation and is constantly shifting, i.e., is not stationary. Attention is an interplay of adjustments of body, sense organs, and the brain. Attention can be categorized into three types, namely voluntary, involuntary, and habitual. Voluntary attention is the attention that requires efforts on the part of the perceiver or observer. Whereas, involuntary attention does not require efforts on our part, but they grab our attention due to strength of the stimuli. Often, attention occurs due to our habits and needs and thus, does not require special efforts on our part. Such attention is known as habitual attention. Attention has some important aspects which help us understand attention better. I. Span of attention indicates the number of stimuli a person can notice at a time. 2. Division of attention refers to the fact that we can divide our attention to two or more things at a time. 3. Fluctuations in attention mean that there are small shifts in our attention, after which it comes back while attending stimuli. IV. Distraction in attention is the effortful or forcible drawing of attention to some other stimulus that is more powerful, while doing some work. B. Control of attention is our ability to consciously focus our attention on a specific or selected task. 3.1. Characteristics of attention. Morgan and Gilliland said that attention is being keenly alive to some specific factor in our environment. It is preparatory adjustment for response. As stated earlier, attention makes us capable of registering only relevant or important stimuli into our conscious and thus, makes it the focus of our attention, and other, irrelevant, inputs our margin that we are dimly or not at all aware about and hence, are not perceived by us. Therefore, perception is done by the process of selective attention. Selective attention is the process in which attention is paid only to a selective input and filtering out of other stimuli. For example, you like Dhoni. So in a cricket match your attention is fixed on him despite what position or post he plays at. Thus, selective attention makes Dhoni your focus and other member your margin. Another example can be that while watching a football match, your eyes and attention are focused on the ball and the ball bearer. You tend to ignore the loud noise the crowd is making or the foul smell of cigarette that the person behind you is smoking. In this case, the ball and the ball bearer are your focus and the noise and the smell of cigarette are your margin. Paper number 1. Cognitive science. Selective attention has some advantages in that it allows us to maximize information gained from the object that is our focus, while reducing the sensory interference from other irrelevant sources. Foley, 1997. Unfortunately, selective attention to one stimulus can lead to neglecting other stimulus. Attention involves two processes of selection. 1. Focusing on a stimulus. 2. Filtering out other incoming information. Both of these processes have been studied experimentally by Cherry through the technique of shadowing. Participants were asked to wear earphones and listen simultaneously to two messages, one through each earphone. They were then asked to repeat or shadow one of the messages word to word as they listen. Shadowing shows that we can't attend to more than one thing at a time. But we can shift our attention rapidly back and forth between the two messages and use our general knowledge to fill in the gaps. Another characteristic of attention is its ability to shift constantly also. This means that one event that is your margin may suddenly become your focus and your earlier focus becomes your margin. Example. While reading this text, suddenly you hear a loud sound of spark from the ceiling fan. Initially the text was your focus, has now become your margin, and the ceiling fan that was your margin has now become your focus now. Another example is the cocktail phenomena. Imagine yourself in a party and are standing between two groups, say A and B, while you are talking with members of Group A focus at the time being. You are dimly aware of the conservation of Group B margin at that time. But suddenly, you hear your name in the conversation of Group B, your entire attention is now focused on Group B, thus, Group B is now your focus. The ability to shift the focus of our attention to detect such changes that are crucial role in our survival in everyday life by alerting us about immediate dangers of our environment. Thus, the shifting capability provides help to avoid peril. For example, this enables us to leap back onto the curb when we hear a screeching sound of a speeding car approaching in our direction. 3.2. Attention and processing of information. Psychologists have provided two explanations for the processing of information. Filtering. One set of explanation is the concept of filtering. Treisman in 1969 said that since we can't process all the information in our sensory channels, we filter or partially block out some inputs while letting others pass. As we can see, this process forms the base of attention. For example, while taking notes during your lectures, you only perceive and write the words your professor says and not the gossip happening between two girls beside you. Thus, you filter only relevant information, professor's words, over the irrelevant ones, gossip. Central bottleneck theory. In 1958, Donald Broadbent gave the first comprehensive model of attention based on Cherry's work on shadowing. According to Broadbent, people attend to only one message at a time. It is based on the idea that humans have limited information processing capacity, i.e., we are never able to process all the inputs that flood into our sensory channels. Bottleneck theory is a strong version of the limited. Paper number 1. Cognitive science. Capacity ideas is the channels are assumed to have limited capacity. It works on the principle of winner takes it all. Simplified flowchart of Broadbent's bottleneck theory. Incoming stimuli are briefly held in a sensory register and then, it undergoes pre-attentive analysis by a selective filter on the basis on its physical characteristics. The selected stimuli pass through a very limited capacity channel and reach a detection device. The stimuli which are not selected are filtered out and are not analyzed for meaning and doesn't reach our consciousness. The unattended messages are supposedly stored in a temporary memory buffer where only their physical characteristics or properties are available for retrieval. Broadbent's theory accounts for the fact that performance on shadowing task gets reduced when similarity between two messages is increased. But it fails to account for Morey's cocktail party phenomenon. Another group of psychologists divided processing of information for attention into two types. Parallel processing. Imagine yourself at a party standing between two groups of people having conversation on different topics. You may be able to pick up some of both the conversation at the same time. This is an example of parallel processing. Thus, we can define parallel processing as the processing in which an individual tries to pay attention to two or more inputs and picking out information from both of them parallelly. Another example would include listening music while doing a mathematical numerical. Serial processing. In the case of the party scenario, you would actually notice that you were paying much more attention to one of the conversation than the other at a time. Thus, you will most likely do what is called serial processing, i.e. attending to one set of inputs than another. But remember that whether you process parallelly or serially, you are filtering out the unattended conversation. You would have relegated these inputs to the margin of our attention. Paper number 1. Cognitive science. 4. Determinants of attention. So the next questions that come up in our mind are that what grabs our attention? What features of a stimulus attract our attention? Can these characteristics be categorized into various types? Are there any specific internal causes that drive our attention to certain stimulus? Although we control the focus of our attention, to some extent, but certain characteristics of stimuli can cause our attention to shift suddenly. Attention depends on several factors, and these can be categorized broadly into two domains: external objective factors and internal subjective factors determinants. 4.1. External factors. External factors are factors that are concerned with the environment. These are also called objective factors. External factors include 1. Intensity. A more intense stimulus tends to grab our attention. A loud sounds or strong smells are more attractive in nature. Example, in a quiet class, suddenly a student's bottle falls. The loud sound intensity of the metal bottle falling grabs your attention. 2. Novelty. Often a stimulus that is seen for the first time or not known earlier catches our attention due to its novelty. Example, a sexually oriented advertisement tends to grab our attention, or a new teacher attracts the children's attention. 3. Movement. A moving object attracts our attention more than a stationary object. Example, you are looking at a landscape, and suddenly a child runs past you. You are more likely to notice the child. 4. Contrast. Anything that is different from its surrounding due to some qualities is contrast. Example, we tend to notice a mascot among a group of cheerleaders because it's completely different from its surrounding cheerleaders. 5. Repetition. If an event is repeated several times, it attracts our attention. Example, if an advertisement is repeated several times on the TV, it draws our attention. 6. Size. A stimulus that is of unusual or different size from its surrounding draws our attention. Example, we tend to notice a dwarf man walking at the metro station than average height men. 7. Change. Change always has attracted our attention. When a stimulus keeps changing, it is perceived faster. Example, the day you get a new haircut, more people tend to notice that and say that there is some change in you. 4.2. Internal factors. Factors that direct our attention due to some internal preference or cause is known as internal factors. These are concerned with the individual and therefore are called subjective factors. Subjective factors include 1. Interest. Interesting stimulus grabs our attention more easily cause we like it, whereas we would not pay attention to any stimulus that we have no interest in. Example, if you like architecture, you are more likely to notice the architecture when you visit a monument. 2. Motives. Basic human motives like hunger, thirst and sex play an important role in grabbing our attention. Example, when we are hungry, any food item draws our attention. 3. Aim goal. Our goals or aims have a great influence on our attention. Example, if one's aim is to score highest marks in the class, he will be more attentive during lectures or while studying. Paper number 1. Cognitive science. 4. Desire. Often a person's desire becomes a cause of focusing our attention on a specific stimulus. Example, you go to a shop to buy a new pair of shoes. Despite of there being many shops in the mall, you would go to a shop that sells shoes. 5. Habit. If we have a habit of doing something, that habit has a tendency to catch our attention. Example, if a person has a habit of playing soccer, he is more drawn to any stimulus related to it. 6. Past experience. Our past experience guides our attention. Example, our past experience shows that notes given by a specific teacher are very helpful during exams. So we would be more attentive in her lectures. 7. Mindset. We will notice things when we are prepared to see and notice them. Example, if we have a mindset that women are submissive, we tend to notice events in which women are submissive rather than those events in which they are not. 8. Other internal factors include temperament. 8. Other internal factors include temperament, attitude, aptitude, etc. 5. Failures in attention. But like any ability, does attention also fail? How does it affect us? What does this failure lead to? What are the consequences? This section focuses on such questions. 5.1. Inattentional blindness. How often has it happened that you might see something in your surroundings but do not register it? For instance, you are jogging in a park, you fail to register the two twin sisters wearing similar dress and eating ice cream into your conscious. In visual realm, scientists have coined the term inattentional blindness, which refers to the failure of unattended stimulus to register in our consciousness. We might be looking at something at a moment of time, but we may not be aware of it later. Example, you are writing down while your friend is talking to you about an outing with someone. Though you hear her words, your attention is more focused on the notes. Then suddenly, she asked you something related. What she said, for instance, the name of the person she went with. You apologize and say that you didn't pay much attention. This is an example of inattentional blindness. Example, research participants were asked to count the number of passes made during a basketball game. They did not notice a woman wearing gorilla suit who walked across the court, even though she remained in clear sight for more than 5 seconds. 5.2. Divided attention. Divided attention is the process of paying attention to two or more tasks. As the term suggests, it is dividing attention to more than one task. An apt example would be the ability to do mathematical numerical while listening to music or eating dinner while watching Vampire Diaries. It is generally believed that humans have a limited capacity to process information, but when several tasks are performed at the same time, this capacity can be increased. Some people are better able to divide their attention between tasks. To know better about divided attention, researchers conduct dual task performance. In these dual task performances, the participants have to perform two tasks at the same time. Their accuracy and error rate are measured. The results have pointed out the factors that determine the dual task performance. The factors are task similarity, task difficulty, practice, and age. Paper number 1. Cognitive science. Studies have shown that in case tasks with same modality, there will be more interference among the tasks. Thus, there is decline in task performance. But if the tasks are of different modalities, performance level improves. Also, if a task is easy, there are less errors in performance, and also, performing two difficult tasks involves processing resources additional to the ones the person has. Hence, performance on one or more of the tasks will be affected. Dual task performance has also shown that practice helps perform better on both tasks. Studies also highlight that performance on dual tasks decreases with age because as we grow older, we retain fewer attentional resources. Therefore, we are able to devote less attention to each task. Over time, divided attention gained more interest among researchers. This led to emergence of many theories. Theories on divided attention. Divided attention is a complex phenomenon which makes it difficult to define and discuss. Kahneman 1973 stated that attentional resources can be increased or decreased depending on the task difficulty, effort, or motivation. In this section, we will briefly touch upon a few theories that focus on divided attention. 1. Central capacity theories. This theory states that central capacity, attention, can be allocated to many activities. This capacity is limited, which means that performance of multiple tasks depends on the demands of each individual task. Decrement in task performance is observed when the demands on the tasks exceed the available attention resources. 2. Multiple resource theory. This theory focuses on the idea that when two tasks are similar, they compete for the same resources, which leads to decline in task performance. Whereas when the tasks are dissimilar, they draw upon different resources. So, there is decreased interference and better task performance. 3. Automatic and controlled processing. In 1977, Shiffrin and Schneider gave the concept of automatic and controlled processing. As the term suggests, automatic processing refers to the processing that is not available to our consciousness and develops through practice. It is fast and requires fewer attentional processes. Where on one hand, automatic processing has no capacity limits. On the other hand, controlled processing is of limited capacity. It requires more attentional resources and is often used in unknown situations. 4. Instance theory. Logan 1988 said that automaticity is memory retrieval. Performance is automatic when it is based on a single-step direct access retrieval of past solutions from memory. This theory was developed by Logan in 1988 and it focuses on how automaticity develops through practice. It states that practice with a stimulus leads to storage of information of that stimulus and there are separate memory traces for each stimulus. There is an increase in knowledge which helps in retrieval of information and hence, automaticity develops through practice. 6. Neurocognition of attention. The biology of attention has always marveled psychologists. Many experiments for the same has been conducted. Most experiments have shown that one of the neural relations of attention includes the concept of enhanced firing. The first of the studies for determining the same biological basis included studies done on monkeys. Montcastle presented the most advanced discovery in 1975 and 1976. He discovered the units in the parietal cortex. When the animal fixates on an object of interest, these units increase their discharge rates and the firing rate changes only when the object of interest has some motivational importance. These cells reside in the inferior parietal lobule. Similarly, Tanji and Everts observed that motor cortex neurons change the firing rate as well. Human neurological cases have presented the anatomy of attention as well. The network associated with attention involves midbrain cantars, which are the source of norepinephrine. This network has the greatest involvement of the frontal regions of the right cerebral hemisphere. In many cases, attention produces. Paper number 1. Cognitive science. Changes in EEG. Also, humans and many animals produce gamma waves when they focus on a particular stimulus. Also, ascending reticular activating system perform its function of intact arousal mechanism which is necessary to maintain alertness. Cortical and limbic structures are involved in focusing the ascending activation. Hence, attention and vigilance result from a complex interaction between limbic neocortical and ascending activating system. Michael Posner proposed a model for the attention system. The model divides attention into three functional components: alerting, orienting, and executive attention. Alerting is defined as the process involved in becoming and staying attentive toward the surroundings. It modulated by norepinephrine and appears to exist in the frontal and parietal lobes of the right hemisphere. Orienting is the process of directing attention to a specific stimulus. The last component is similar to Baddeley's concept of central executive. Executive attention is used when there is a conflict between multiple attention cues. Erickson did flanker task showed that executive control of attention takes place in the anterior cingulate cortex. Correlations have been found between plasma dopamine beta hydroxylase (DBH) and measures of selective attention. High DBH is linked with a greater enhancement of an evoked response when subjects direct attention toward the stimulus. Attention has a different anatomy that carries out basic psychological functions and is greatly influenced by specific brain injuries. Diffuse cerebral dysfunction resulting from the toxic encephalopathy is the most common cause for impaired attention. Korsakoff's psychosis leads to inattention that has the characteristics of indifference and perseveration. In an article by Stephen Matisse, he linked excessive fixation of attention with amphetamine overdose. He also said that, just as dopaminergic agonists have a tendency to produce attentional preservation, dopamine antagonists such as the neuroleptics seem to weaken the grip of fixed ideas. Indeed, this may be one of the reasons for their therapeutic value. Yet there is more to be discovered about the biological basis underlying this adaptive process, attention. 6. Summary. Attention is the perceptual process of selecting only a few or certain stimuli or input for inclusion in our conscious awareness. Attention is of three types: voluntary, involuntary, and habitual. Attention divides our field of experience into focus and margin, where focus is the event that we perceive clearly and margin is that we are dimly aware about. There are two explanations given for processing of information. One explanation for processing of information is through filtering, whereas the other explanation is based on processing of information serially or parallelly. Attention is determined by external and internal factors. External factors include intensity, movement, novelty, change, contrast, repetition, and size, whereas internal factors include interest, motives, aim, goals, desire, habit, past experience, and mindset, etc. Failures in attention can have drastic consequences, and inattentional blindness is a type of failure of attention. Divided attention is the process of paying attention to more than one task. It has stirred quite an interest in the realm of psychology, and many theories like central capacity theory, multiple resource theory, automatic and controlled processing, and instance theory have developed to explain this complex phenomenon. The biology of attention has presented attention as an interaction between neural networks and hormones. Paper 2. Introduction. As discussed earlier, attention can be referred to as the behavioral and cognitive process of selectively concentrating on one aspect of the environment while ignoring other things. We can also refer to it as the allocation of processing resources. In layman language, when you are paying attention to something particular, all your focus lies around that object. For example, consider that you are watching your favorite TV series. Your mother keeps calling you, but all your attention is directed towards TV, and you tend to ignore other things demanding your concentration. Attention is one of the most important topic, in which a lot of studies are being conducted in areas of psychology, cognitive neuroscience, and neuropsychology. We are bound to wonder about the causes of signals that generate attention, and also to understand the impact of these signals on the turning characteristics of the sensory neurons. It also tries to assess intercorrelation between information processing units such as perception, learning, etc. What happens when our attention is diverted? What causes us to drop everything at hand and redirect all our attention to some new issues in our environment? How do we prioritize which issue deserves our attention first? Neuropsychologists have been trying to answer these questions. But to comprehend the theories that have been proposed, we first need to understand what selective attention is. 3. Selective attention. As you read these words, 100 million sensory messages may be clamoring for your attention. Only a few of these messages register in awareness, the rest you perceive either dimly or not at. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. All. But you can shift your attention to one of those unregistered stimuli at any time. For example, how does the toe of your right foot feel right now? Attention encompasses two courses of selective attention. 1. Selectively attending to specific stimuli. 2. Sorting aside simultaneous sensory input. A technique called shadowing has been used to experimentally study these processes. The results of such investigation reveals that attention to multiple stimuli at a given time is difficult. However, fast shifting between the messages is possible. The blanks occurring as a result of set shifting are covered by our general knowledge. For example, people listening to music and working on a math problem simultaneously are actually either listening to music or focusing on the math problem at a particular instant. They can divert their attention from the math problem and catch up with how much the song has passed. 3.1 Visual attention. We are aware that visual attention operates on two stages, and that is why it is called a two-stage process. At the initial level, attention is proposed to be scattered over entire visual field with simultaneous cognitive functioning activated. For example, you are given a book to read and you are told to go on a certain page and read a certain paragraph. When you are operating on the first stage, you take a look at that page in general while parallel paying attention to the exact paragraph you have been asked to read. At the secondary level, only specific inputs are attended to and cognitive functioning follows a serial mode. For instance, while reading, the attention is directed towards specific words and other words form the context for the current reading, which forms the margin. Since they fall in the margin, one is not consciously aware of the words but certainly gains help to extract meaning for the current reading. Basically, you read each word individually while being oblivious to the words accompanying that particular word. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. 3.2 Selective auditory attention. Selective auditory attention or selective hearing is instinct cognitive activity. It refers to selective attention to a specific type of an auditory stimulus such as a sound or a particular type of voice. The noises that happen in the environment are sensed but not attended to and hence are also not perceived. To grab a better understanding of this, imagine yourself in party standing with a group of people, having a discussion on, let's say, psychology. Since it's a party, there is noise everywhere in the environment. You are able to be a part of your discussion because you are focusing on the specific source of spoken words and other noise is automatically ignored. 3.3 Inattentional blindness. Electronic recording and brain imaging studies have revealed that unattended stimuli register in the nervous system but do not enter immediate experience. Inattentional blindness is a term coined to refer to incapacity of the brain to encode information that is not consciously given attention to. You can look right at something without seeing it if you are attending to some other stimuli. This is what happens when you are deep in thoughts and you're directly staring at someone without realizing it. Also, inattentional blindness is surely relevant to finding that cell phone conversations significantly reduce driving performance. You don't expect to pay attention on the road ahead if you are hearing on phone that your mother has been admitted to a hospital. Right. Also, it's a very bad idea to drink and drive as alcohol ingestion increases inattentional blindness. 3.4 Environmental and personal factors in attention. Characteristic of stimulus and personal features emerge as two strong determinants of attention. Stimulus characteristics that attract our attention include intensity, novelty, movement, contrast, and repetition. Sexually oriented stimuli are especially attention-grabbing. No wonder advertisers use these properties in these commercials and packaging. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Internal factors, such as our motives and interests, act as powerful filters and influence which stimuli in our environment we will notice. For example, if you are a graphologist, you will be particularly interested in a handwriting sample before you notice anything else. This all is basically about prioritizing which stimuli are we going to register and attend to and which stimuli can be ignored for a while. These factors are the core of selective attention and are under extensive study to help understand the concepts of attention better. 4. Theories of selective attention. 4.1 Broadbent's filter model of attention. Human processing system using an information processing metaphor was first explained by Donald Broadbent. With this goal, Broadbent posited a model based on limited information processing capacity. He stated that humans carry the capacity to selectively choose information for processing and scrutinize information for subsequent later processing. In layman language, there is a certain capacity beyond which humans don't process information. Also, humans passively prioritize as to which information or what part of information has to be processed early as compared to the remaining information. Keeping in mind that the capacity is limited, Broadbent suggested that a strict scrutiny is required for information processing. He explained that selection of stimuli is based on certain common physical aspects such as color, structure, intensity, etc. Semantic features stand distinct and complex than physical characteristics and therefore posit limited ability to store sensory input. Hence, based on structural properties, selective information is processed while unattended data is eventually faded. Additional to this is target-oriented actions that requires attention to be controlled, thus it leads to high degree of selectivity for information processing stream. During the development of this rationale, he stressed on allocation and scrutiny of sensory input to attended or unattended channels. Basically, the initial filtration occurs when the incoming stimuli is segregated into the ones which will be attended and the ones which won't be attended. What's noteworthy here is that selection of the channel is directed by attentive processes. In case if an individual is aiming to attend to a stimulus conforming to the present target, voluntary attention will come in play. However, in case where irrelevant extra sensations are received, reflexive attention will come at play. To comprehend this, imagine a group of typists sitting in a room all ready for instructions on what to type. Each typist has been assigned to a different person. As soon as the work begins, there are sounds of legal documents being recited in the room. But an individual typist only hears what his boss is saying instead of what other typist's boss is reciting. What the typist doing here is mere segregation of incoming stimuli into attended and unattended channels. This demonstrates how he uses voluntary attention to fulfill his current goal. If suddenly his colleague asks for paper, he would not be distracted and hand him over the paper. This is how he uses reflexive attention to respond to a sensory event. Information after transiting through the filter gets encoded in short-term memory. Basically, after information has passed the filter, apart from it being available for short-term memory, it is also. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. Open for strategic changes in specific pieces of information. Open for strategic changes in specific pieces of information before its permanent transfer to the long-term memory. This explanation further proposes that there exists an irresistible amount of information entering the channels and because of that a selective filter is required to effectively deal with it. How is that done? By making sure a double filtration process where already filtered initial messages are again filtered for subsequent processing. The theory emphasizes on scrutiny at the beginning stage only as information to be further processed is selected at the initial level itself. 4.2 Filter attenuation theory. The word, attenuation, basically refers to weakening in force or intensity. It is the property of something that has been weakened or reduced in thickness or density. Anne Treisman, a graduate student of Broadbent's, proposed a substitute explanation called the filter attenuation theory. The reason for developing this alternate view was her lack of belief in working of the filter as decision maker in discerning the conscious acknowledgement of sensory input. The explanation completely favors the working through an earless selection filter. Therefore, the filter plays a role attenuating information received by the unattended channels. Remember we discussed in Broadbent's theory that there is a division of sensory input into attended and unattended channels. It is understood that the unattended channel deal with weakly attended stimuli. In order to gain self-acknowledgement, the stimuli should exceed a threshold. He proposed that this threshold is determined by the compilation of words with their meaning. Significant words like one's own name lie at a low threshold level whereas other uncommon words such as file lie at greater threshold for their conscious acknowledgement to happen. Thus, in such manner, the semantic characteristics of the stimuli act as its own filter. You must have experienced how your attention instantly shifts if you hear your name being mentioned in the discussion of an adjacent group of people. This is the mechanism behind it. Another interesting thing to note here would be the fact that not everybody's name would have a low threshold for. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science. If the adjacent group of people mention a stranger's name, like Sam, it would have a high threshold and not gain your awareness. Interesting, right? We have seen that this particular theory of attention preserves both the concept of early selection of information as well as use of physical characteristics as deciding factors for their inclusion as attended or unattended stimuli. Passing through beginning stage of attenuation, stimuli is then processed by hierarchy of analyzers executing higher order functioning for more significant information. The basic fact of the theory is that information that has been selected as the attended stimuli will accomplish complete higher order processing whereas the unattended stimuli will not be subject to such processing and thus be stored only for physical factors than meaningful inferences. Further, the process of attenuation and higher order functioning is controlled by the present needs and targets. At the same time, there are lack of resources to comprehend the unattended material which is then eventually lost. Recognition threshold. This aspect focuses on the level of threshold, minimum initiation necessary, to be hit for gaining conscious awareness. More this threshold is low, higher is the probability of sensory information to be recognized post-attenuation process also. As mentioned earlier, your name has a lower threshold for you than the capital of Uganda. Threshold effectors. Context and priming. Context is a set of facts or circumstances that surround a situation or event. It is imperative in lowering the threshold needed for identification of input by forming expectant environment for concerned input. This indicates that any word can be easily identified with the aid of context. Context works as a priming agent, making input easily approachable and thus reducing its threshold mark. Consider the following statement. The table is round. The word, round, here. Psychology paper number 1, Cognitive Science, will automatically gain recognition as a result of the context in which it is stated. The initial words will act as priming agents, thus reducing its threshold level. Subjective importance. Words that involve subjective significance are more likely to have lower level of threshold. You are more likely to process the stimuli if it says your house is on fire. Words or phrases that share a close link with your personal identity will surely in most of the circumstances will be recognized. In contrast, words that carry multiple meaning depend heavily on the context and the priming agents. Stereotype words, taboo words are also more easily recognized than other common words of our regular usage. Hierarchy of analyzers. This system economizes information processing. It finally attenuates the unattended information and eases the attended information to be adequately recognized and processed. In case of overwhelming sensory input, it scrutinizes information and protects sensory bombardment. When processing load is less, complete hierarchy processing takes place, and when processing load is high, attenuation becomes more active and avoids processing of irrelevant stimuli. 5. Summary. Attention can be referred to cognitive active, including specific things in the stream of conscious focus while excluding other stimuli in the margin. Selective attention refers to focusing all your attention of a specific source of incoming stimuli. It incorporates double way of selection, selectively attending to specific stimuli and sorting aside simultaneous sensory input. Attentional blindness is a term coined to refer to inability of unattended input to gain conscious awareness. Attention is strongly affected by both characteristic of stimulus and personal features. Broadbent's filter theory of attention proposed a model based on limited information processing capacity. He stated that humans carry the capacity to selectively choose information for processing and scrutinize information for subsequent later processing. Attenuation theory is a revision of Broadbent's theory of selective attention, and apart from supporting an early selection filter, it also states that the filter also attenuates sensory input given to the unattended channel.